Good evening. I am an African and I like telling stories, and I have 20 minutes, and you know that's a problem. I ask you to pray for me. All protocols observed. I'm just going to dig right in. I stand before you here as a stranger, and I love this state of being a stranger. I will not be assimilated. I love being an African, working among Europeans. As a stranger, I know that I will see things that you as Europeans may not see, things of your own culture, things of your own ways of doing mission. But I also know that as a stranger, I'm going to get some things wrong. So I'm giving you permission. If I say something outrageous tonight, just dismiss it as that African who really doesn't know what he's talking about among us. But I'm a stranger among people that make me feel at home. The Malawian flag right there just, warms my heart. I've been on this journey for a long time. I've not been in a place where so many people know about Malawi than I've been here since yesterday. I can name my village and people will recognize it. That makes me feel at home. I can't just say I'm from Blantyre. People know Blantyre. People know exactly where I come from. So it makes me feel really, really at home. But my entry into Europe more than 20 years ago was through Switzerland in a city called St. Gallen. I came to St. Gallen as a missionary, as a youth worker. So the Christian history of the city caught my attention. I learned about somebody called St. Gall who came to Switzerland 1400 years ago, started a monastery that's grown in its influence to have a city around it, and the city became St. Gallen. So coming to Bangor, the place where St. Gall came from, really feels like a pilgrimage to me. I'm so grateful. I'm so delighted to be with you tonight. As I said, I have 20 minutes now. I think I have maybe 17. But I want to talk to you about three things regarding mission in the world today. I will try as much as possible. Talk about the current state of mission in the context of world Christianity, and then what that means for us as we try and figure out what is it that God is doing, and how does God help us make sense of the fact that actually there are Christians all over the world today, and all of them have to be engaged in God's mission somewhere, somewhat. And then finally, I'll try and paint a rough picture of where I think mission is going. So that's my plan for tonight. If you were a Christian 50 years ago, certainly 70 years ago, maybe 100 years ago, you would most definitely be white, living in Europe or North America, or maybe Europeans who have migrated to South America, Australia, or New Zealand. I mean, up until 1950, 85% of Christians in the world were living in the West, and they were white. That has changed so much in the past 70 years, to the point that as I speak to you today, around 30% of Christians in the world are in Europe and North America. There are more non-Western Christians in the world today than there are Western Christians. That has happened so fast, I don't think that we have actually had time to process what that means. The fact that there are more Presbyterians in Malawi than there are in Scotland. Yeah, it's just unbelievable. There are more Anglicans in Nigeria than in the West put together. Think about it. And then as you try and process that, it's the same case with Uganda. There are more Anglicans in Uganda alone than in Europe and North America put together. There are more Anglicans in Kenya alone than in Europe and North America put together. All that has happened in the past 50, 70 years. Now, a great deal of that is a result of European and Western missionary work in the world in the past 200 years. My own story, you will know the name David Livingstone. He brought the university's mission to Central Africa, to Malawi in 1861, and he brought them to the village where I was born. My home actually was the first British European mission station in Central Africa. My father's side was already in the area, and so they became Christians through a lot of that work. My father's mother's side, my grandmother's grandfather was converted again by Scottish missionaries in the early 1880s in Blantyre, when they were just establishing Blantyre Mission. And he would be one of the two people from that part of the world to come to Scotland for education in 1885. Think about it. As we have gone down the decades, Malawi has shifted from being this small country where, of course, you have Scottish missionaries coming in, you have English missionaries coming in, Roman Catholics, to a place where, as we stand today, Malawi is 85% Christian. And that story can be told about many countries in sub-Saharan Africa. We could talk about the Congo, right? Of course, easily one of the richest countries in the world, and yet one of the poorest countries in the world. And how almost every Congolese person you will meet is a Christian. They count that between 95 and 97% of Congolese peoples are Christian. And we can talk about the same about Lesotho and Swaziland and many other places in Southern Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa. But all that really goes back to the work of your ancestors. People who left these beautiful islands, many of them carrying all their belongings in their coffins, knowing that they're not coming back, and sacrificing everything, sacrificing their lives so that they can share the gospel with us. But let me expand that a little. That also should, at least in our minds today, we need to realize that it's not just the European missionaries who made what Christianity happened. In the 1800s alone, between 1800 and 1900, almost 25% of Europe's population migrated to the rest of the world. Many of them went to Africa. Many of them went to other parts of the world. They were Christians, European Christians, not missionaries. Actually, I can go as far as saying they were actually economic migrants who left these beautiful countries here because there was gold in South Africa, and there was diamond in Botswana, there was land in Zimbabwe. And they carried their Christianity with them. And so when we celebrate today the fact that in every country in the world there are Christians, there are followers of Christ, let us always remember that. Their work was by no means perfect, and ours is not perfect. Let's get over that. We're not going to be perfect, but still, God used them. Myself and many of my friends talk about the problem of mission and colonialism. We talk about mission, slave trade, and racism, and all that. I think we need to acknowledge those things. But we need to celebrate the fact that God actually used them to touch the world. I stand here with a grateful heart. David Livingstone, David Clement Scott, who converted my grandmother's grandfather, and the many missionaries that have come from this part of the world. The work that you do in Malawi, I've heard a lot about the hospital in Emangweni in the past 2 days. And we can go back to how it started, back with Robert Laws back in the 1870s. All that work is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much. I speak as one of those who has been touched by a great deal of your missionary work. Now, the fact that there are Christians in every country in the world, and I think, I could make a theological argument, I don't have time for that, but when we convert people to Christianity, we automatically invite them to engage in mission with us. God's mission. It shouldn't be possible to think about following Christ without engaging in God's mission. Some of us will be missionaries in our own villages, in our own towns, in our own cities, and some of us God will call to go and travel to other parts of the world. But as we celebrate that there are Christians in every country in the world, we should also be aware that that means as mission workers, we have brothers and sisters who are mission workers from around the world. You have brothers and sisters who are mission workers from Malawi, from South Africa, from Chile, from Fiji, that's God's work. Now, as we wrestle with what that means, as I said, this has happened so fast that actually we haven't really processed what it means for us. One of the things that I think we need to do is, and I use the story of Acts 15, the Council of Jerusalem, to try and process some of this. That all of a sudden, you have all these Gentile Christians who are joining the Christian community, and the leaders don't know what to do with them. So they have to come together in Jerusalem and ask questions. What do we do with these Gentile Christians? Do we want them to become Jews? What? And I think that as European mission agencies, you need to answer this question. What do you do with all these missionaries that God has called from around the world? In Acts 15, they come to a conclusion that, we let them be Gentiles. Don't force them to become Jews. Just help them, Don't bring food offered to the idols to the table, so that we can actually have fellowship together without being fearful of anything. Let's promote fellowship. And I do think that as people wrestling with the question of mission today, here in Europe, we need to think about this. What do we do? What do you do with the Nigerian Christians who show up in your cities? And the South Koreans and the Chinese and the South Africans and the Brazilians. What do you do? Yes, you can give them space to rent in your church for their services. Fine, that's okay. But they ought to engage in mission. And we cannot have divided, segregated mission communities. It's not good testimony for the work that God is doing in the world. We need to wrestle with this one. What does it mean for us today? What does it mean that God is the same God that called Livingstone to go to Malawi, the same God that called Gal to come from Bangor to Switzerland, the same God is calling Ghanaians to Belfast, and is calling Brazilians to London. He's calling us. For the first time, really, we live in a context where mission can really be from anywhere to anywhere in the world. that God can call a Malawian to go and work in Brazil, and call Brazilians to go and work in Canada, and call Canadians to go and work in India, and call Indians to go and work in China. God can do that. Actually, God does that. And as God does that, what is our place? What is our role? Now, I want to suggest that just as you do when you're around a dinner table and guests come in, shift the chairs a bit, bring in a few more chairs, let them sit with you, let them eat with you, let them enjoy hospitality with you. But as you do that, let them join the conversations. It does not help. I mean, you won't even do that. Just bring chairs around the table and you continue talking as if there are no visitors around you. It'll be bad manners. So when this happens, learn to pass on the mic so you can listen to the great things that God is doing around the world. God has done this intentionally. The body is richer when it hears from all its members. Ephesians 4:16, this body, its health, its vitality really depends on us sharing the gifts that God has given us. You need to move on from thinking that you have it all. And that mission is about the West giving to the rest. The future of mission, and I'm jumping myself here, but the future of mission really involves mutuality. That we don't just come to the table, and nobody comes to the table empty-handed. Nobody comes to the table without a gift, but we don't come to the table just with our gifts, not expecting to receive. We give with one hand, we receive with another. And that's how the body works. That when we gather together at this table, the table where God is the host and we are all guests. Doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter. We are all guests at God's table. And when we sit at this table together, everybody brings something. But nobody has everything. Therefore, everybody has also to receive from somebody. And so a great deal of where we are going in mission really involves, yes, God has given the West a lot of resources to share with the world. But there are things that Western Christians need to receive from Malawians and Mozambicans and Tanzanians and it's by design. God made things that way. And so when we get together around the table, we create space for guests around the table. We don't hog the conversation. Pass the mic. Let's. And this becomes critical, really, because we all have blind spots. All of us. Nothing to be embarrassed about. Every one of us has a blind spot. And God has designed it that your blind spots will be covered by your neighbors and your friends. People who can, you need people in your lives, you need people in your ministries who can ask you the difficult questions. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this way? I found myself in a mission conference in Manchester with a group of mission leaders in the UK, and they were strategizing how to take Malawi for Jesus. And of the 25 Malawian pastors who live in Manchester, nobody was invited. Just did not make sense. I went into another conference, and this ministry has created a branch in their, it's a mission agency, it has created a branch of their mission agency that is focused on working with the African diaspora in Europe. I looked through their whole structure. There are no Africans at all. How do they justify this in Europe today? And so And so, yes, of course, I had to ask the questions. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this way? And we all need people who can ask us those questions. Now, I said the future of mission evolves out of mutuality, a lot of exchange between us all, between the West and the rest, between all of us. So we need to position ourselves for that. We need to be able to give and receive. Don't just give. You're depriving the body of something. Give and receive. Westerners want to think of themselves as givers all the time. Give and receive. God has gifts for you in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia. Don't just give. Find ways to receive. But, 2, the future of mission is very multicultural. Something for you to think about. As I said, God's mission involves all of us. And we come in different colors, with different accents, different languages. But we're all involved in God's mission. How do we make this work? And finally, I have to jump some things. The future of mission is very post-denominational. And I say this because the work that God is doing in Africa, with the many Africans that are coming from Africa to Europe, same with Latin Americans, same with Asians, they're not coming in with denominational labels. If anything, they actually don't have those structures. That's why it's difficult to count how many missionaries have come from Africa to Europe. Because they're not coming in through CMS, they're not coming in through any of these mission organizations. They're coming in simply because God has moved them. I argue that mission is really about revival and migration. When the Spirit of God moves people, and actually it moves them inward and causes a fire and energy to burn inside them, but it also moves them to carry that fire to other parts of the world. And that is, to a great extent, at the moment, happening in Africa, in Latin America, and parts of Asia. So mission, as we go forward, is going to be shaped by different concerns than the concerns that have shaped European mission for the past 200 years. And it better look different. It better have different issues to wrestle with. This is critical. The mission theology that we have today has to be rethought with the gifts, the theological gifts that God has given the body now, that we have African theologians and Asian theologians and Latin American theologians all wrestling with mission theology. Now, finally, last point. The future of mission has to involve us all realizing that Europe is a mission field. When Livingstone came to my village in 1861, when David Clement Scott came to Blantyre Mission in 1880s, the language was that the heathen was in Africa. Today, Africa has more Christians than Europe by over 100 million. So that's quite a huge margin. But it may not feel like that here in Northern Ireland, and it may not feel like that in parts of the UK. But really, honestly speaking, just as much as the heathen was in Africa back then, and maybe there are still heathens in Africa, but the heathen now is also in Europe. And we need to rethink how we're doing things, to begin actually to take Europe seriously as a mission field. Let me stop there. God bless you.